Maybe you should tell them what you actually do all day. My husband's words landed harder than the laughter that followed. I stood there in my simple black dress, surrounded by his coworkers, their wives, and the executives he had spent years trying to impress. He smiled like he had just delivered the funniest joke of the night. I forced a small laugh. Then he leaned closer and whispered, "Please don't embarrass me tonight." I wanted to disappear. 4 years, I had supported that man while he built his career. I had sacrificed opportunities, managed our home, and stood beside him through every difficult promotion and every late night. But that night, he made me feel like I had contributed nothing. And then his boss looked across the room at me. His expression changed. He stopped smiling. He stared at me for several seconds before quietly saying my name. "Mrs. Carter, could I speak with you for a moment? Before I tell you what happened next, I want to know something. What city are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if you've ever been underestimated by someone you loved, hit like and subscribe, because you may understand exactly what happened to me." The strange part is, I had no idea why the CEO wanted to talk to me, and neither did my husband. But 3 years earlier, everything had started very differently. "Maybe you should tell them what you actually do all day." My husband said it with a smile. Then he laughed. A few people around us laughed too. I stood beside him in a black dress I had bought 2 years earlier, holding a glass of sparkling water because I had promised myself I wouldn't drink that night. It was his company's annual holiday party, held in a downtown hotel ballroom with crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and enough expensive perfume in the air to make me dizzy. My husband, Daniel, looked perfectly comfortable. He wore a tailored navy suit and the confident smile I had watched him practice for years. "Come on," he said, squeezing my shoulder. "Tell them. What do you do all day?" I knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted them to laugh. And they did. One of his coworkers, a man named Mark, chuckled and said, "Daniel, give her a break." Daniel shook his head. "No, seriously. She's been home for years. I honestly don't know how she fills the time." Another woman smiled awkwardly. I smiled too. That was the worst part. I smiled because I didn't want anyone to see how badly those words hurt. I had spent 17 years being Daniel's wife. I had raised our daughter, Emma, managed our home, handled the bills, organized every school appointment, every family birthday, every emergency, and every move Daniel made in his career. When Daniel worked late, I was the one who kept dinner warm. When he traveled, I was the one who handled everything at home. When he got promoted, I was the one who told him he deserved it. And now, in a room full of people who admired him, I was apparently nothing more than the woman who didn't work. Daniel leaned toward me. "Please don't make this weird tonight." I looked at him. "I'm not making anything weird." He gave me a warning look. "Just smile." So I did. For another 20 minutes, I stood beside him while he introduced me as his wife. Not once did he mention the years I had spent helping him get where he was. Not once did he mention that when he was laid off early in our marriage, I had taken a second job at a medical office so we could keep our mortgage. Not once did he mention that I had put my own career on hold because Emma had severe asthma when she was little and someone needed to be available when the school called. Those things didn't fit the story Daniel wanted people to hear. His story was simpler. He was successful. I stayed home. He built a career. I did nothing. At least, that's what everyone in that ballroom seemed to believe. Then Daniel saw someone approaching. His entire expression changed. "Mr. Whitmore." Daniel straightened immediately. The man walking toward us was Richard Whitmore, the CEO of the company Daniel had worked for during the last 11 years. Richard was in his late 50s, silver-haired, calm, and surrounded by people wherever he went. Daniel quickly stepped forward. "Sir, I'd like you to meet my wife." Richard smiled politely. Then he looked at me. His smile disappeared, not gradually, instantly. His eyes narrowed as if he were trying to recognize someone he hadn't expected to see. I felt a strange chill move through me. Richard looked at Daniel, then back at me. "Mrs. Carter." My heart skipped. I hadn't heard my name spoken like that in years. "Yes." Richard took one step closer. "Is your full name Elizabeth Carter?" Daniel looked confused. "Yes," I said. Richard stared at me for several seconds. Then he quietly said, "I need to speak with you." Daniel laughed nervously. "Of course, sir. Whatever you need, you can say it here." Richard didn't look at him. I wasn't speaking to you, Daniel. The smile disappeared from my husband's face. Around us, the conversations continued, but I suddenly felt as though the entire ballroom had become silent. Richard gestured toward a quieter hallway. Mrs. Carter, would you come with me? I glanced at Daniel. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. Don't go. I had never seen fear in his eyes like that before. And that was when something inside me shifted. Because Daniel wasn't embarrassed anymore. He was scared. I followed Richard into the hallway. He stopped beside a large window overlooking the city. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked, How long have you been married to Daniel? 17 years. Richard nodded slowly. And during those 17 years, did you ever work for a company called Whitmore Financial? I stared at him. No. He looked genuinely surprised. Are you sure? Yes. Richard reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He opened something on the screen. Then he turned it toward me. I looked down, and my breath caught. It was an old photograph. A photograph I hadn't seen in almost 20 years. I was younger. Much younger. I was standing in front of a conference room with a group of executives, and beside me was Richard Whitmore. But that wasn't what shocked me. It was the name printed underneath the photograph. Elizabeth Carter, Senior Operations Director. I looked at Richard. I don't understand. I know, he said quietly. Then he showed me another photograph. And another. Every photograph was from before I met Daniel. Every one showed me inside the company. Every one carried a title I had almost forgotten. Richard lowered the phone. Your husband never told you? Told me what? He hesitated. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. Daniel didn't meet you by accident. I stared at him. What does that mean? Richard looked toward the ballroom. That's what I need to find out. He paused. And after tonight, I think you deserve to know the whole story. I didn't know it yet, but the humiliation I had just endured was not the beginning of my story. It was the moment someone finally opened a door Daniel had spent 17 years keeping locked. And behind that door was a life I had completely forgotten I once had. I followed Richard back toward the ballroom, but everything felt different now. The music was still playing. People were laughing. Waiters were carrying champagne, and Daniel's coworkers were still enjoying the party. But I couldn't hear any of it clearly. One sentence kept repeating inside my head. Daniel didn't meet you by accident. Before I could ask Richard what he meant, Daniel appeared in front of us. Elizabeth! His voice was low. He wasn't smiling anymore. Richard looked at him calmly. Daniel, what exactly were you discussing with my wife? Richard glanced at me. I'll see you Monday morning, Mrs. Carter. 9 o'clock. Daniel immediately stepped forward. She doesn't work here. Richard looked at him. I know. Something changed in Daniel's face. Richard walked away. I stared at my husband. Why does your CEO know my name? He probably saw it somewhere. He showed me photographs of myself. What photographs? Photographs from before we met. I was working at Whitmore Financial. Daniel's eyes shifted away. I don't know what you're talking about. You looked scared. I wasn't scared. You were. He grabbed my hand. Let's go home. I pulled away. Did you know who I was before we met? His face went still. No. The answer came too quickly. On the drive home, neither of us spoke. When we finally arrived, Daniel went upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, trying to remember the woman I had been before him. I remembered college, my first apartment, a downtown office, a woman named Sarah, long meetings, then nothing. It felt like trying to remember a dream after waking up. Later, I went upstairs. Daniel was already in bed. You're going to Richard's office Monday, aren't you? Yes. You shouldn't. Why? Because you don't know what you're walking into. Neither do you, apparently. He sat up. Elizabeth, trust me. I looked at him. I've trusted you for 17 years. He said nothing. I went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m, I heard Daniel leave the room. I followed him downstairs. He was standing in the study, holding an old cardboard box. Then he pulled out a folder. Even from the doorway, I could see my name printed across it. Elizabeth Carter. My heart started racing. Daniel opened the folder. Inside was the same photograph Richard had shown me. Then I saw another document. At the bottom was a signature. My signature. But I didn't remember signing it. I stepped into the room. What is that? Daniel quickly closed the folder. Nothing. My name is on it. You don't need to worry about this. Give me the folder. No. Daniel. He looked at me. You don't understand. Then explain it. He shook his head. You're better off not knowing. I stared at him. That isn't your decision anymore. He looked terrified. I reached for the folder. He pulled it away. Why is my signature on a document from before we were married? Daniel said nothing. Tell me, he finally whispered. Because you weren't supposed to remember any of this. I froze. What did you just say? He immediately looked away. Forget it. No. Elizabeth. No. Tell me the truth. He closed his eyes. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. I promised your father. I stared at him. My father. Daniel nodded. He asked me to keep something from you. My father died 14 years ago. I know. Then what exactly did you promise him? Daniel looked at the folder. That you would never find out. I couldn't breathe. My father had always been the person who believed in me most. After he died, I had spent months trying to rebuild my life. Then Daniel came into it. Or at least, that was what I remembered. Now even that memory felt uncertain. Why would my father ask you to hide something from me? Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he whispered. Because he was trying to protect you. From what? He looked at me. I can't tell you. Why? Because I promised. I stepped backward. For 17 years, I had believed my marriage began with a chance meeting. Now I wasn't sure anything about it had been a coincidence. I turned and walked upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard Daniel making a phone call. I stopped on the stairs. I think Richard found her. Silence. Then Daniel said, No, she doesn't remember anything. Another pause. But she's going to Richard's office Monday. I heard the other person's muffled voice. Daniel's face suddenly changed. He whispered, Then you have until Monday morning to fix this. I stood frozen in the darkness. Someone had been hiding the truth from me for 17 years. And now, whatever that truth was, they were running out of time. I barely slept that night. By morning, I had made one decision. I was going to Richard's office. I didn't tell Daniel. At breakfast, he acted as if nothing had happened. He poured himself coffee and opened his phone. Morning. I looked at him. Morning. He avoided my eyes. For 17 years, I had known every little habit of that man. I knew when he was angry. I knew when he was nervous. And I knew when he was lying. That morning, he was doing all three. I have an appointment today, I said. His hand stopped. With who? Richard. He slowly put down his coffee. I told you not to go. I know. Elizabeth, please. It was the first time he sounded genuinely desperate. That should have made me stay. Instead, it made me want answers even more. I need to know why my name is in that folder. Daniel stood. You don't understand what you're getting yourself into. Then help me understand. He said nothing. I picked up my purse. I'll be back later. Elizabeth. I stopped at the door. He looked at me. If Richard tells you something about me, don't believe him. I turned around. Why? Because he isn't telling you the whole story. I stared at him. Neither are you. Then I left. Richard's office was on the 32nd floor of a glass tower downtown. When I walked into the lobby, the receptionist immediately looked up. Mrs. Carter? I stopped. Yes. Mr. Whitmore is expecting you. She smiled as if my arrival had been scheduled for weeks. That made me uncomfortable. I followed her upstairs. Richard was waiting near the conference room. Thank you for coming. I sat across from him. I need answers. You deserve them. Then start with the photographs. Richard nodded. You worked for my company 20 years ago. I don't remember. You were one of the best people we had. I frowned. What was my job? Senior Operations Director. The title sounded strangely familiar. Richard continued. You weren't just an employee. You were leading a major internal investigation. An investigation into what? He hesitated. Our finances. My stomach tightened. Was someone stealing money? Yes. Who? Richard looked directly at me. We never proved it. Then why was I involved? Because you found something. He opened a file. Inside were copies of old reports. My handwriting appeared on several pages. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was mine. Richard pointed to one paragraph. You discovered that millions of dollars had been moved through a series of shell companies. I stared at the document. Who owned them? We couldn't determine that at first. And then, Richard leaned back. Then you disappeared. I looked at him. I didn't disappear. From the company, you did. What happened? You resigned suddenly. I don't remember resigning. Richard's expression softened. That's because you were injured. I felt a strange pressure in my chest. Injured? You were driving home one night when another car hit you. I stared at him. A flash suddenly appeared in my mind. Rain. Headlights. A loud crash. Then darkness. I grabbed the edge of the table. Richard stood. Are you okay? I remember the rain. He nodded slowly. You were in the hospital for several days. Why don't I remember? Your doctor said the trauma could affect your memory. I closed my eyes. Another image appeared. My father sitting beside a hospital bed, his hand around mine, his voice saying something. I couldn't hear the words. Then another image. Daniel, standing in the hospital doorway. I opened my eyes. Daniel was there. Richard didn't look surprised. Yes. How did he know? Richard was silent. Richard? He was already involved in the investigation. I stared at him. What? Daniel worked for us at the time. My heart stopped. No. Yes. But we met after that. Richard shook his head. You met him before the accident. I couldn't breathe. That isn't possible. It is. I stood up. You're lying. I wish I were. Richard opened another file. This is the original personnel record. He slid it across the table. There it was. Daniel Carter. Employee. Whitmore Financial. My husband had worked for the same company before we were married. I stared at the document. Why didn't he ever tell me? Richard's voice became quiet. Because after your accident, your father asked us not to. My father. He was afraid you would remember the investigation before you were ready. I shook my head. This doesn't explain why Daniel married me. Richard looked at me. No. What does it explain? He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, Daniel wasn't investigating the theft. I frowned. Then what was he doing? Richard slid another document toward me. My eyes moved down the page. At the bottom was a name. A name I recognized. Daniels. He was investigating you. I looked up. What? Richard's expression was grave. Your father suspected that someone inside the company was using you to hide the evidence. I felt sick. Are you saying my father suspected me? No. Richard shook his head. He suspected someone was using your identity. I looked back at the documents. Suddenly, the years before my marriage felt like pieces of a puzzle scattered across a floor. I had been investigating missing money. I had been in an accident. I had lost part of my memory. Daniel had been there. And somehow, after all of that, he became my husband. I whispered, why would he marry me? Richard didn't answer. Instead, he asked me a question. Elizabeth, do you remember the name Sarah? My heart stopped. The name from my memories. Yes. Richard's face changed. Then there's something else you need to know. He opened the final file. And when I saw the photograph inside, I immediately recognized the woman standing beside me. Sarah, my best friend. The woman I had believed moved away 20 years ago. But according to the date on the photograph, she had been standing beside me only 3 days before my accident. And written on the back were 6 words. Sarah knew who betrayed Elizabeth. I stared at the photograph. Sarah. For years, I believed she had simply moved away. I remembered crying when she left. I remembered calling her number and getting no answer. But now Richard was telling me she had been standing beside me 3 days before my accident. Where is she? I asked. Richard looked down. We lost contact with her after your accident. Lost contact? She disappeared. My stomach tightened. Did she know what happened to me? She knew something was wrong. Did she know who was responsible? Richard hesitated. She believed she did. Who? I don't know. I turned the photograph over. The handwriting on the back said, Sarah knew who betrayed Elizabeth. Did you write this? No. Then who did? Richard shook his head. We need to find out. He handed me my old personnel file. Inside were employment records, medical reports, and documents from the investigation. Then I saw Daniel's name. Daniel Carter, assigned to monitor Elizabeth Carter. My hands went cold. Monitor me? I turned the page. Another note caught my attention. Relationship with subject developing rapidly. The date was 21 years ago. 3 months before my accident. I stared at the words. Why was my husband monitoring me? Richard looked uncomfortable. Your father asked us to keep you safe. That doesn't explain why Daniel married me. Richard didn't answer. I left his office with the file pressed against my chest. Outside, my phone rang. Daniel. I answered. Where are you? At work. Richard told me about your old job. Silence. Were you an employee at Whitmore Financial? Yes. Did you know me before we met? Another pause. Yes. My heart sank. You lied to me. I was trying to protect you. From what? I can't explain over the phone. Then explain tonight. I will. The call ended. I sat in my car, trying to process everything. Then I noticed something on the passenger seat. A white envelope. My name was written across it. Elizabeth. I opened it. Inside was one sentence. If you want the truth about Daniel, ask him what happened to Sarah. My hands began to shake. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. Don't trust your husband. Another message appeared. He isn't the only one who lied to you. Then a third. Ask your father why he left you the money. I froze. What money? My father had never left me any significant money. At least, that's what I believed. Then I remembered an old locked drawer in his study. After his death, Daniel had told me there was nothing important inside. I suddenly wasn't sure I believed him anymore. I drove to my father's old property. The house had been sold years ago, but the old shed remained. Inside was the desk from my father's study. I searched the drawers until I found a small brass key. I had kept it for years without knowing what it opened. The bottom drawer was locked. The key fit. Inside was an envelope. My father's handwriting covered the front. For Elizabeth. I opened it. The first line made my heart stop. Elizabeth, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong. I kept reading. There is money in an account you don't know about. I created it because I knew one day you might need to disappear. Disappear? Why would my father ever want me to disappear? Then I reached the final paragraph. Trust no one who tells you your accident was an accident. I stopped breathing. My father knew. He knew something could happen to me. And somehow, Daniel had known too. Then I noticed another envelope beneath the letter. 2 words were written across it. For Sarah. I opened it. Inside was a photograph of my father, Sarah, and Daniel. They were standing together. The date was 1 week before my accident. I turned the photograph over. There was a handwritten message. If anything happens to Elizabeth, Sarah knows where the evidence is. I stared at the words. Then I heard a car door slam outside. Someone was approaching the shed. I quickly turned off the light and stepped into the darkness. Footsteps came closer. Then I heard a familiar voice. Daniel. My husband. He was talking to someone. She's already found the letter. A woman's voice answered. And the moment I heard it, my heart stopped. I knew that voice. It was Sarah. I pressed myself against the wall of the shed and held my breath. Sarah, the woman I had believed was gone for 20 years, was standing outside with my husband. I heard Daniel speak again. How did you know she would come here? Sarah answered quietly. Because her father knew she would eventually remember. My heart pounded. Daniel lowered his voice. She found the letter. I know. She also has the photograph. There was silence. Then Sarah said, Then we don't have much time. I covered my mouth. I wanted to step outside. I wanted to scream at them. Instead, I stayed hidden. Daniel asked, What are we going to tell her? The truth. She won't believe us. She doesn't have to believe us. She only has to see the evidence. Daniel sounded frustrated. We promised her father. Sarah's voice softened. Your promise was to protect her, Daniel. Not to keep her blind forever. I closed my eyes. Protect me? That was what Richard had said too. But if Daniel had been protecting me, why had he lied for 17 years? Then Sarah said something that made my blood run cold. She was never the person they were investigating. Daniel replied, I know. Then she needs to know who was. I heard footsteps moving away. I waited several seconds before stepping out. The parking area was empty. Daniel and Sarah were gone. But I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I went back inside the shed and read my father's letter again. There was a bank account. An account created for me. I searched the envelope and found a small card with a bank name and an account number. At the bottom, my father had written, The truth is in the safety deposit box. I drove to the bank. The account was still active. The employee asked for identification. I handed it over. After several minutes, she returned with a key. Your father rented a safety deposit box 20 years ago, she said. I stared at the key. What is inside? I'm not allowed to know. She led me downstairs. My hands were shaking as I opened the box. Inside was a thick envelope, several photographs, and a small digital recorder. I picked up the envelope first. My father's handwriting was on it. Open this only when you remember enough to ask the right question. I opened it. There was only one page. Elizabeth, the money is not your inheritance. It is evidence. I read the sentence twice. Evidence. The photographs suddenly made sense. I looked through them. They showed company offices, bank documents, and people meeting in parking garages. Then I saw a photograph of Daniel. He was standing beside a man I didn't recognize. I turned it over. A date. 2 weeks before my accident. Underneath it was a note. Daniel followed him. I looked at another photograph. This time I recognized the man. Richard. Richard was meeting the same person. My mind raced. If Richard knew about the investigation, why had he helped me? And if Daniel had been assigned to monitor me, who had he actually been following? I picked up the digital recorder. There was only one file. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the small room. Elizabeth, if you're hearing this, I failed to keep you away from this. I stopped breathing. His voice sounded older than I remembered. I need you to understand something. Daniel is not your enemy. I closed my eyes. Your father, I whispered. The recording continued. Daniel was placed near you because I believe someone inside the company was trying to use your investigation against you. I listened carefully. You found evidence that someone was moving company money through accounts connected to people close to us. A pause. Someone knew what you had discovered. Then my father's voice became quieter. That person wasn't Daniel. I felt tears forming in my eyes. Your accident wasn't random. The recording stopped for a second. Then he continued. Sarah helped Daniel protect the evidence after the crash. I asked them both to keep you away from it until your memory returned. I stared at the recorder. Everything I thought I knew was falling apart. Daniel hadn't been spying on me for himself. He had been protecting me. But then why had he humiliated me at the company party? Why had he allowed me to believe I was nothing? Why had he spent 17 years keeping this secret? I listened to the final part of the recording. There is one person you must never trust. My heart began pounding. My father's voice became almost a whisper. If that person ever discovers that you remember. The recording suddenly became distorted. Then it ended. I pressed the button again. Nothing. I searched the box for another recording. There wasn't one. Then I noticed something underneath the photographs. A folded document. I opened it. It was a bank transfer record. Millions of dollars had been moved from a company account into another account shortly before my accident. The receiving account belonged to a company I didn't recognize. But the signature authorizing the transfer was familiar. I had seen it many times. I stared at the page. My hands went numb. The signature belonged to Daniel's boss, Richard Whitmore. I sat there in silence. Richard had told me he wanted to help me uncover the truth. My father had warned me never to trust one person. And now I had evidence connecting Richard to the missing money. I didn't know if Richard was the criminal. I only knew one thing. Someone had been lying to me. And suddenly, I wasn't sure whether the person I should fear was the man who had protected me, or the man who had just opened the door. I left the bank with the document hidden inside my purse. For the first time in 17 years, I was afraid of going home. Not because of Daniel. Because I no longer knew who I could trust. Richard had helped me. My father had warned me about someone. And now I had proof that Richard's name was connected to the missing money. But there was one problem. The transfer record didn't prove Richard had stolen anything. It only proved that he had authorized the transfer. I needed more. When I arrived home, Daniel was waiting in the living room. He stood when he saw me. Where were you? I put my purse down. Out. His eyes searched my face. Did you find anything? I paused. Why? Because you look different. I learned some things today. He looked nervous. From Richard? No. Then from who? I stared at him. Sarah. His face changed. Only for a second. But I saw it. You saw her. Yes. Where? At my father's old property. Daniel slowly sat down. What did she tell you? That you were supposed to protect me. He looked down. I waited. Finally, he said, "It's true." "Then why didn't you tell me?" "Because your father made me promise." "My father is dead." "I know. And you still kept the promise." Daniel looked at me. "Because I loved him." I shook my head. "You loved him." "I respected him." "That doesn't explain 17 years of lies." He stood. "I was afraid that if you remembered everything too quickly, someone would come after you again." "Who?" He didn't answer. I took the transfer document from my purse. "What about Richard?" Daniel's eyes widened. "Where did you get that?" "The bank." He took one step toward me. "Elizabeth, you shouldn't have that." "Why?" "Because it isn't what you think." "Then explain it." He looked at the document. "That money was moved to protect the evidence." "By Richard?" "Yes." "So he was involved." "He was trying to stop it." I stared at him. "Then why did my father tell me not to trust someone?" Daniel went silent. "You know who he meant." He looked away. "Daniel!" He finally whispered. "Yes." "Who?" Before he could answer, someone knocked on the front door. 3 slow knocks. Daniel froze. I looked at him. "Were you expecting someone?" "No." Another knock. Daniel moved toward the door. I followed. He looked through the window. His face went pale. "Who is it?" He didn't answer. I looked through the glass. It was Sarah. Daniel opened the door. Sarah walked inside. She looked older than I remembered, but her eyes were exactly the same. She looked at me. "Elizabeth." My throat tightened. "You're alive." Sarah nodded. "I've been alive this whole time." "Why did you disappear?" She looked at Daniel, then back at me. "Because someone wanted me dead." I stepped closer. "Who?" Sarah hesitated. "That's the problem." She looked at Daniel. "We were wrong." Daniel frowned. "About what?" "About Richard." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a deep breath. "The transfer wasn't Richard's crime." She pointed toward the document in my hand. "Richard authorized it because your father told him to." I felt confused. "Then who stole the money?" Sarah looked at Daniel. He nodded slowly. Sarah said, "Someone inside your family." My heart stopped. "My family?" She nodded. "Someone had access to your father's accounts, your personal information, and the investigation." I shook my head. "Who?" Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she asked me a question. "Do you remember the night of the accident?" I closed my eyes. Rain. Headlights. A crash. Then darkness. Sarah stepped closer. "You weren't alone in that car." My eyes opened. "What?" "You were driving, but someone was sitting in the passenger seat." I stared at her. "Who?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You." I frowned. "What does that mean?" She swallowed. "You had a folder with you." "What folder?" "The evidence." Daniel interrupted. "Sarah." "No," I said. "Let her talk." Sarah continued. "You were taking the evidence to your father." "Why?" "Because you had discovered who was stealing the money." My heart pounded. "Who?" Sarah looked at me. "You had written the name down." "Whose name?" She hesitated. Then she said, "Your husband's." The room went silent. I looked at Daniel. He didn't move. I felt the floor disappear beneath me. "Daniel." He closed his eyes. Sarah quickly said, "Elizabeth, listen to me. That's not what you think." I stepped backward. "You just said I found his name." "I said you wrote it down." "Why?" "Because someone wanted you to believe Daniel was responsible." I looked between them. "Who?" Sarah shook her head. "We don't know." I laughed bitterly. "After 17 years, you still don't know?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "We know who benefited from the lie." "Who?" She reached into her bag. Then she pulled out an old photograph. She placed it on the table. It showed my father, Daniel, and another person. I stared at the third figure. My heart stopped. It was my mother. But my mother had always told me she had never been involved in my father's business. Sarah whispered, "Your mother wasn't just his wife." I looked at her. She was the person who had access to everything. Daniel stepped forward. "And she knew about the money." My hands began to shake. My mother had died 6 years ago. I had spent years believing she was simply a quiet woman who stayed out of my father's business. Now I was learning that she might have been at the center of everything. Sarah looked at me. "There is one more thing you need to know." "What?" "The night of your accident." She stopped. Her eyes moved toward Daniel. "Your mother was the one who made the call." I stared at Sarah. My mother made the call. Sarah nodded. The call that night came from her phone. I felt dizzy. That doesn't mean she caused the accident. No, Sarah said. It doesn't. Then why are you telling me? Because your mother knew where you were going. Daniel stepped closer. She knew you had the evidence. I looked at him. How? Sarah answered. Because someone told her. Who? Sarah shook her head. We never found out. I couldn't accept it. My mother had always been gentle with me. Even after my father died, she was the person who called me every Sunday. She had held my hand when I gave birth to Emma. She had cried when Daniel and I celebrated our anniversary. How could she possibly be connected to this? Maybe you're wrong, I whispered. Sarah looked at me sadly. I wanted to be wrong. She opened her bag and pulled out a small envelope. This was found in your mother's belongings after she died. I took it. My name was written on the front. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. It showed my mother standing outside a restaurant. Beside her was a man. I recognized him immediately. It was the same man from the photographs in my father's safety deposit box. The man Daniel had been following before my accident. Who is he? Sarah said. His name is Thomas Reed. Who is Thomas Reed? Daniel answered. He was your father's business partner. I looked at him. My father never mentioned him. Because they had a falling out. Sarah shook her head. That's not the whole story. She pointed at the photograph. Thomas wasn't just your father's partner. He controlled the accounts the money was being moved through. I looked at the photograph again. Then why was my mother meeting him? We don't know. I turned to Daniel. You knew about this? Yes. And you never told me? I was trying to protect you. I laughed bitterly. Everyone keeps saying that. I walked toward the window. For 17 years, I believed my family was ordinary. Messy sometimes. Difficult sometimes. But ordinary. Now I was discovering secrets buried beneath every part of my life. Sarah spoke softly. There's something else. I turned around. What? Your mother didn't make the call alone. I frowned. What do you mean? She called someone after she called emergency services. Who? Sarah looked at Daniel. Daniel! I stared at my husband. He nodded slowly. She called me. My heart dropped. You spoke to my mother that night? Yes. What did she say? She told me you had the evidence. What else? Daniel looked down. She said Thomas knew. I felt a chill. Did she tell you to follow me? No. Then why were you there? Daniel took a breath. Because your father had already warned me. About what? That someone was planning to stop you. I shook my head. And you still let me drive that night? I didn't know where you were. Then how did you find me? Daniel said nothing. I stepped closer. How did you find me, Daniel? His eyes filled with regret. Your mother told me. The room became silent. I suddenly remembered something. A flash. Rain hitting the windshield. My mother's voice on the phone. A warning. Then headlights behind me. I grabbed the edge of the table. I remember. Everyone froze. I closed my eyes. The memory came in pieces. My mother had called me. She was crying. She told me not to go to my father's office. She told me someone was watching me. Then she said something else. Something I had forgotten for 20 years. Elizabeth, don't trust the man in the car behind you. I opened my eyes. Someone was following me. Daniel nodded. Yes. Who? We don't know. I looked at Sarah. You said someone wanted me dead? Yes. Then why did I survive? Sarah looked at Daniel. He answered quietly. Because I reached you first. I stared at him. You were the one who found me? Yes. And the folder? He nodded. I took it. Why? Because the person following you was still nearby. I looked at Sarah. What happened to the evidence? She lowered her eyes. We hid it. Where? Sarah hesitated. Your father had a second safe. My heart started pounding. Where? Sarah looked at me. Inside your old family home. The house that was sold. Yes. I shook my head. That house was demolished years ago. Sarah's expression changed. No. What? It wasn't demolished. She pulled out her phone and showed me an old property record. The address was familiar. My father's house. But the owner wasn't the developer who bought it. It was a private company. A company I had never heard of. I looked at the name. Carter Holdings, LLC. My maiden name. I stared at Sarah. My father owned it? Not anymore. Who does? Sarah didn't answer. Daniel did. Thomas Reed. My heart sank. The man who had been connected to the missing money now owned my father's old property. And somewhere inside that property was the evidence everyone had spent 20 years hiding. I looked at Daniel. Take me there. He hesitated. Elizabeth. I'm done being protected. I picked up my coat. This time I want the truth. Sarah stood. I'm coming with you. Daniel nodded. But as we walked toward the door, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. If you go to that house, you won't come back. I stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. Your mother wasn't trying to save you that night. My blood ran cold. She was trying to stop you from finding the truth. The message on my phone kept replaying in my head. Your mother wasn't trying to save you that night. She was trying to stop you from finding the truth. I looked at Daniel. Is that true? He shook his head. We don't know. Sarah stepped closer. That's why we need to find the house. We left immediately. Daniel drove while Sarah sat beside me. After several minutes, I asked, if my mother was involved, why did she keep calling me after the accident? Sarah looked at me. Because she regretted what she had done. What did she do? We don't know. I looked at Daniel. You know something. He kept his eyes on the road. Your mother called me after the accident. She told me Thomas had threatened her. With what? She wouldn't say. Then why did she trust you? Because your father asked me to protect you. I stared out the window. Nothing made sense anymore. When we reached the property, the house looked abandoned. The windows were covered. The lawn was overgrown. But the old basement entrance was still there. We went downstairs. At the end of the hallway stood a wooden cabinet. I remembered it from childhood. My father had always kept it locked. Daniel moved it aside. Behind it was a steel door. Sarah whispered, "This is it." Daniel entered a combination. The door opened. Inside were boxes filled with financial records, photographs, and old files. My name appeared on almost every folder. I opened one. There were photographs of me from the months before my accident. Then I found a photograph of Daniel standing behind me, watching me. I turned toward him. You really were following me? Yes. But you weren't trying to hurt me. No. I opened another file. My father's handwriting appeared on a timeline. Elizabeth discovers missing funds. Sarah confirms irregular accounts. Daniel assigned to protect Elizabeth. Thomas becomes aware of investigation. Then one final line. Mother involved. I stared at it. Why didn't he write her name? Maybe he was afraid someone would find this, Sarah said. I opened another folder. Inside was an email from my mother. We need to stop Elizabeth before she takes this to her father. My hands began to shake. Sarah whispered, I've never seen that. Another message followed. It was from Thomas. Then make sure she never reaches him. I felt sick. That night. Daniel nodded. Thomas knew you were coming. I turned the page. There was a list of phone calls from the night of my accident. My mother's number. Thomas's number. Daniel's number. And one more number I didn't recognize. The call had been made 11 minutes after my accident. I looked at Daniel. Who was this? He took the paper. His face suddenly went pale. This was your father's private number. But my father was dead. Daniel stared at the date. This call happened 20 years ago. I felt confused. My father was alive then. Yes. Then what's strange about it? Daniel looked toward the back wall. That number was supposed to be disconnected. We searched the basement. Behind several boxes, we found a narrow door. Inside was a tiny office, an old desk, a telephone, and a computer covered in dust. A photograph sat beside the telephone. My father, my mother, and Daniel. I stared at the date. 3 years before Daniel and I supposedly met. I turned toward him. Why were you with my parents? Daniel's face went pale. Before he could answer, the computer suddenly powered on. A single file appeared. Elizabeth, watch this before you trust anyone. I clicked it. My father's face appeared on the screen. He looked older, tired, afraid. Elizabeth, he said, if you're seeing this, then you finally found the room. I couldn't move. There is something I never told you about your mother. He paused. She wasn't working with Thomas. I looked at Sarah. My father's voice continued. She was working with me. The screen suddenly went black. Nobody spoke. Then the basement door slammed shut upstairs. Someone had entered the house. Footsteps moved across the floor above us. Daniel grabbed my hand. We have to leave. But before we could move, the computer turned on again. A new file appeared. The night of the accident. Daniel looked at me. Don't open it. I shook my head. I'm done being afraid. I clicked the file. The screen went black. Then my mother's voice filled the room. And the first words she said were, I'm sorry, Elizabeth. I lied to you. My mother's voice filled the hidden room. I'm sorry, Elizabeth. I lied to you. I couldn't breathe. She appeared on the screen, sitting at the same desk where I was standing. I know you have questions, she said. You deserve the truth. She took a breath. Your father discovered that Thomas was moving company money through accounts connected to people we trusted. I looked at Daniel. My mother continued. He wanted to expose Thomas. But Thomas discovered the investigation. The screen flickered. He threatened our family. My mother's eyes filled with tears. He told your father that if the investigation continued, Elizabeth would be hurt. I covered my mouth. Your father refused to stop. She paused. Then I made the worst decision of my life. I leaned closer to the screen. I agreed to help Thomas. Sarah whispered, No. My mother's voice continued. Not because I wanted to betray your father. I thought I could protect Elizabeth. She had given Thomas information about the investigation. In return, he promised to leave me alone. But he lied. The video showed several documents. Dates. Bank transfers. Names. Then the night of my accident. My mother's voice became quieter. I called Elizabeth because I knew Thomas was following her. Suddenly, I remembered the rain. The headlights. Her voice. Don't trust the man in the car behind you. I wanted her to turn around, my mother said. But she didn't. The screen went dark for a moment. Then she continued. Someone hit her car. I closed my eyes. I thought Elizabeth was dead. Sarah covered her mouth. But Daniel found her. I opened my eyes and looked at my husband. My mother continued. I asked Daniel to take the evidence and keep Elizabeth safe. Daniel looked down. I also asked him to make sure she never learned what I had done. My chest tightened. For 17 years, Daniel had carried that secret. My mother had continued. I believed forgetting would protect her. I whispered, You stole my life. Daniel looked at me. She was trying to save it. I turned toward him. You knew. Yes. You knew everything. Not everything. Enough to lie to me. He looked devastated. I loved you. Then you should have trusted me with the truth. He had no answer. The video continued. There is one thing you must understand, Elizabeth. My mother's voice trembled. Thomas wasn't working alone. I looked at Sarah. Who else? My mother continued. Someone inside our family helped him. The screen went black. A new file appeared. The name. Daniel immediately stepped toward the computer. Don't open it. I looked at him. Why? Because this is what they wanted you to find. Who? He didn't answer. Suddenly, footsteps echoed above us. Someone was inside the house. Sarah grabbed my arm. We're not alone. The basement door opened. A man's voice echoed through the hallway. Elizabeth. I recognized it. Thomas. Daniel moved in front of me. Thomas appeared at the entrance. You shouldn't have come here. I stared at him. You threatened my family. I protected an investment. You caused my accident. No. His answer was immediate. I didn't cause your accident. Then who did? Thomas looked at Daniel. Ask your husband. I turned toward Daniel. What does he mean? Daniel's face went pale. Thomas smiled. He knows who was driving the second car. My heart stopped. Daniel. He closed his eyes. I found the car. Whose car? Your mother's. I shook my head. No. It was registered to her. But she was trying to protect me. She was following you. Thomas interrupted. Your mother wasn't following you to protect you. I looked at him. Then why? Because she was trying to stop you from reaching your father. Why? Because your father had discovered who was stealing the money. Thomas stepped closer. And it wasn't me. Silence filled the room. Sarah stared at him. Then who? Thomas looked directly at me. Ask Elizabeth. I frowned. What does that mean? The evidence was never stolen. My heart began pounding. You hid it. Thomas shook his head. Your father put it in your hands. A memory suddenly flashed through my mind. Rain. Headlights. The folder on the passenger seat. My own handwriting. I remembered opening the final bank statement. I remembered seeing a name. Not Daniel's. Someone else's. A name I had trusted all my life. I gasped. Sarah stepped toward me. What do you remember? I looked at Daniel. My mother wasn't protecting me from Thomas. Daniel's face changed. She was protecting herself. Thomas smiled faintly. Now you're finally remembering. Then the hidden room door slammed shut. Someone locked it from the outside. We all turned toward the door. And then I heard a voice through the darkness. A voice I had heard throughout my childhood. My mother's voice. Elizabeth, you still don't know the whole truth. The voice came through the locked door again. Elizabeth, you still don't know the whole truth. I froze. It was my mother's voice. But my mother had been dead for 6 years. Sarah looked at me in terror. Daniel moved toward the door. Who are you? No answer. Then the voice came again. Open the door, Elizabeth. My hands began to shake. That isn't possible. Daniel looked at me. It could be a recording. No. The voice sounded too real. I stepped toward the door. Who are you? A long silence followed. Then the answer came. Someone who has been waiting for you to remember. Sarah suddenly grabbed my arm. Don't open it. Before I could respond, the lights went out. The room fell into darkness. Daniel pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. Stay together. We heard movement behind the hidden office. Someone was inside with us. Daniel turned the light toward the corner. Nothing. Then a metal box fell from a shelf. I walked toward it. The box had a small label. Elizabeth, final evidence. I opened it. Inside was a letter from my father. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. Elizabeth, if you have reached this room, then you finally know enough to understand what happened. I continued reading. Thomas was never the person who stole the money. I looked at Sarah. She whispered. Then who was it? I kept reading. The person responsible was someone I trusted more than anyone. My heart raced. Then I saw the name. I couldn't speak. Sarah looked over my shoulder. Her face went pale. Daniel closed his eyes. The name on the paper was my mother's. I stared at it. She really did it. Daniel shook his head. Not exactly. I looked at him. What does that mean? She moved the money, but she wasn't stealing it. Then where did it go? My father had written the answer beneath her name. She moved it to protect Elizabeth. I felt confused. My mother had transferred millions of dollars into another account. Why? I read the next paragraph. Thomas had discovered that the company was being used to finance an illegal operation. He threatened to expose our family unless your mother helped him. I looked at Daniel. But why would she move the money? Because she knew Thomas would take it. Sarah pointed at the letter. Your mother created another account. I read the next line. The money was placed in an account under Elizabeth's name. I stopped breathing. The mysterious bank account. The money my father had said was evidence. It had always belonged to me. But there was another sentence. If Elizabeth ever remembers the truth, give her the second file. I looked around. Where is it? Daniel pointed toward the computer. The final file. We returned to the desk. The computer screen was still on. A new file appeared. The person behind everything. I clicked it. My father's face appeared again. This time he looked exhausted. Elizabeth, I'm sorry. He took a deep breath. I lied to you because I believed it was the only way to keep you alive. I stared at the screen. Thomas was dangerous, but he wasn't the only threat. My father looked directly into the camera. The person you need to fear is someone you have trusted for years. The video paused. Then another photograph appeared. It showed my mother, Thomas, Richard, and one more person, Daniel. But behind them stood someone else. Someone I recognized immediately. My stomach dropped. It was Sarah. I turned toward her. You knew. Sarah started crying. I didn't know everything. You were there. Yes. Why? She wiped her tears. Because your father asked me to help him. With what? Protecting you. Then why did you disappear? She looked at Daniel. Because Thomas found out. I stared at both of them. So everyone was protecting me? Daniel nodded. But someone still betrayed us. I looked back at the photograph. Then I noticed something. The person standing behind them wasn't Sarah. It was someone beside her. Someone partially hidden by the darkness. I moved closer to the screen. My heart stopped. I knew that face. It belonged to someone who had been in my life for years. Someone I had never suspected. I whispered the name. Michael! Sarah looked at me. Yes. My old friend. The man I had remembered from before the accident. The man I thought had disappeared from my life. He had been there all along. My father's final words continued. Michael was the one who gave Thomas information about Elizabeth. I felt sick. He knew about the investigation. He knew about the money. And he knew about the accident. Daniel looked at me. He was the person following you that night. Suddenly, the memory returned completely. The car behind me. The headlights. Michael's face. He wasn't trying to pass me. He was following me. I remembered him calling my name. Then another car appeared. My mother's car. She wasn't chasing me. She was trying to block Michael. I gasped. My mother wasn't trying to hurt me. No, Daniel said. She was trying to stop Michael. Everything suddenly made sense. My mother had called Daniel because she knew Michael was following me. Daniel had taken the evidence because he knew Michael was dangerous. My mother had spent years carrying the guilt because she believed her decision had put me in danger. I looked at the locked door. Then who was outside? Nobody answered. The voice came again. Elizabeth. This time, it wasn't my mother's voice. It was Michael's. My blood ran cold. The door handle began to move. Daniel stepped in front of me. Sarah whispered, "He found us." The door suddenly opened. Michael stood there. Older. Calmer. Smiling. "You finally remembered." I stared at him. "You caused the accident." He shook his head. "No." "Then what happened?" He looked at Daniel. "Your husband knows." Daniel's face became pale. Michael smiled. "Tell her, Daniel." I turned toward my husband. "What isn't he telling me?" Daniel took a deep breath. Then he said the words that changed everything. "Elizabeth." He looked into my eyes. "You were never the target." I froze. Michael's smile disappeared. Daniel continued, "You were the witness." And suddenly I understood why everyone had spent 20 years trying to keep me from remembering.